Hossam, an ordinary office employee, lived a dull and repetitive life. Every day he woke up at the same time, drank the same coffee, and went to the same office, where he spent long hours writing reports that no one ever read. He felt an odd emptiness, as if he were living on repeat without any excitement. One day, during his work break, he was browsing the internet when he stumbled upon an advertisement for a discounted trip to a European country he had never heard of before. The offer was irresistible, with an unbelievably low price and breathtaking images of charming cities. While he was lost in thought, his colleague, Sami, patted him on the shoulder. "Hossam, why not break the routine and travel? Life is short, my friend." That was all Hossam needed to hear. Without hesitation, he pulled out his credit card and booked the trip, as if his fate had been sealed in that very moment. On the day of his departure, Hossam arrived at the airport, full of excitement. But as usual, he was completely unprepared. He had forgotten his passport at home, forcing him to rush back to retrieve it while his car was illegally parked outside the airport, leading to a small argument with a traffic officer. After a series of chaotic events, he finally reached the boarding gate just minutes before takeoff. At the security checkpoint, the alarm beeped as he passed through the scanner. A security officer eyed him suspiciously. "Officer, do you have any metal objects on you?" Hossam, nervously, "Just a small ring. Oh, and my belt, my watch, my keychain, my phone, my laptop charger, and a handful of coins." The officer gave him an unimpressed look as the passengers behind him glared with frustration. After checking his bag, the officer discovered that Hossam had accidentally packed a nail clipper, causing even more hassle and delays. At last, he was allowed through, but he had forgotten his bag at the checkpoint and had to run back to retrieve it, earning even more suspicious stares from the airport staff. Upon arriving at his destination, Hossam's first day was a complete disaster. He got into a taxi and handed the driver the hotel's address, but due to his poor pronunciation of the local language, the driver misunderstood him completely. An hour later, Hossam found himself standing in front of a fish market instead of his hotel. He tried to explain his mistake to the vendor, who misunderstood and assumed he wanted to buy a giant fish. The vendor insisted on gifting him one as a welcome gesture. When he finally reached his actual hotel, he was hit with another surprise. The booking was not registered. After a long argument, he discovered that he had mistakenly booked a hotel with the same name, but in a different city 300 kilometers away. He had no choice but to settle for a tiny, stuffy room in another hotel, with no air conditioning and a bed too small for him. After a long and exhausting day, Hossam decided to treat himself to some local cuisine. He entered a traditional restaurant and randomly pointed at a dish on the menu without knowing what it contained. A few minutes later, the waiter placed a steaming bowl in front of him. It turned out to be the spiciest dish in the entire country. The moment he took a bite, his face turned bright red, and he started gasping for water. Unfortunately, the waiter misunderstood his plea and brought him extra hot sauce instead. Desperate, Hossam grabbed his drink, only to realize it was a local herbal beverage infused with even more spices. Now his mouth felt like it was on fire. He ran into the streets searching for relief until he found a store selling yogurt. He grabbed a bottle and downed it in one go, while the locals watched in utter confusion. The next day, while exploring the city, Hossam noticed a large crowd gathering in front of a huge building. Curious, he approached to see what was happening. Before he knew it, he was pushed into a long queue. Due to yet another misunderstanding, he found himself inside a TV studio, mistakenly participating in a game show. Before he could process what was happening, he was seated in the contestant's chair while the host fired off a question. Host, first question. What was the name of the first emperor who ruled this country in the 18th century? Hossam, sweating, "Emperor? I don't even know the full name of this country." The audience burst into laughter, and Hossam became an instant sensation for his clueless yet hilarious responses. By the time he left the studio, people were asking to take pictures with him, making him feel like an accidental celebrity in a foreign land. After a whirlwind of chaotic adventures, Hossam finally returned home, carrying unforgettable memories. His trip wasn't what he had expected, but he realized that life doesn't always need a perfect plan. Sometimes, it just needs a little madness and a lot of laughter. When Sami asked him about his trip, Hossam grinned and said, "A trip straight out of the movies, but definitely a black comedy." Then, he opened his suitcase to reveal the souvenirs he had bought, only to discover that he had accidentally taken someone else's bag, filled with swimwear and brightly colored shorts.